and Jewish priests or other religious figures trying to scare or have some sort of influence over the uneducated masses. And so stage magic started becoming more prevalent as a source of entertainment after Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft and the Age of Enlightenment. So people were less afraid of witchcraft or like other supernatural ideas of magic, and more technology was developed to sort of create these giant, there's pictures on the next slide of these giant stages. And so later on, as film started to become more prevalent, stage magic sort of really helped aid that transition. And this goes back to McLuhan's idea of the content of one medium is always another medium. And so magic started to disappear a little as film became more narrative focused. So we went over earlier last week about the cinema of attractions and how there was like the whole visual spectacle element, and we saw how there were a lot of illusions involved in those types of early films. And if you go to the next slide. So these are just a couple of the theaters and the stages that people created at the peak of stage magic. So this one has a bunch of hydraulic pumps underneath the stage to sort of elevate and just move the stage around. And this one is a giant water tank where people are swimming around in, and people are watching that. So yeah.
Okay, so that being said, the magic of history wouldn't be what it is without certain people that made it into what it is today. And so I just wanted to go through a couple of the people that made magic. So basically the first person in history that's recorded to have a reference to magic is Deity. He was a magician in ancient Egypt. However, he may or may not be real. There's lots of things to say he's a fictional character and that, but he was referenced in the Westcar Papyrus, which was basically an ancient text that was about magic and as such at the time. So even if he wasn't real, it was referenced all the way back then. And so between then and the next person I have, there's a huge time jump. So basically between that time, from the 2700 BC to around like 400 AD, magic grew in like its references in various cultures. So like in Greek myths and others, there was like little mentions of magic and such. And then so from 400 to 1000, like the Dark Ages, magic was more associated with like the occult or like the knowledge of, which means like the knowledge of the hidden. It wasn't something really common or did. It was kind of like, you know, people didn't really associate with that. From then till around the Middle Ages, people basically interacted with magic through like street performers, you know, con artists kind of, and then it was mentioned in witchcraft. So then again, it wasn't something people really wanted to associate with because it had kind of like had a stigma around it. And then towards the Enlightenment period, as Hannah stated earlier, was that it was kind of a move away from the belief in magical and such into more of a practical belief. It kind of parallels with the Reformation of the church at the time as well, where it moved from Catholicism to Protestant beliefs. So here's Reginald Scott, as you mentioned earlier. He was the author of The Discovery of Witchcraft, which was the first textbook on conjuring at the time, and he was a member of the English Parliament. And the reason he wrote it was he kind of wanted to debunk witchcraft, and basically he said that like witchcraft isn't real. All the magical things you think they do, they're actually just tricks. And so he explained how they did some of their things, and therefore made magic less of like something like associated with magical powers and more of just like deceiving things. Next we have Isaac Fox. So he was one of the earliest magicians that used magic as a form of entertainment outside of the fairground. As I said earlier, it was more of like either was associated with witchcraft or like street artists, but this kind of changed it. So he wanted to basically, he wasn't even like that famous a magician. He wasn't the first magician, but he was just someone who constantly said, like magic isn't a bad thing, basically. Like it's something to be entertained by. We're not trying to steal your money as some of the street performers would do, and we're not like trying to perform things. It's just for your entertainment, is basically what he said. And he got famous to a point where he even performed in front of King George II. Next we have basically, he was known as the father of modern magic. He opened a theater that was really famous and got people to go there. Originally, he was not a magician though; he was a watchmaker, and he was actually famous for making automata, which are basically mechanical devices that are made to be realistic, like humans or lifelike objects. So a lot of times, like he made one that could do magic tricks, and it was like shit. They're really creepy. I didn't include a picture because I'm really scared by them. But I will present on the next one. There's a little video clip of one of his automata, which is a tree, and it's like an orange tree, and it looks really realistic, and it makes oranges appear from a tree. So, play that clip. So I just sped it up at the beginning. Basically, this is maybe I should say who this is. So this is Paul Daniels. He had like a little show on BBC back in the 1980s where he presented like magic shows. Or not magic shows, but like demonstrated magic tricks. He wouldn't explain how they worked, but he just like demonstrate them from the time period. So he's talking to a lady in the audience who is a representative from like Cartier. I think it was like a product placement kind of thing. Basically, he's going through showing like she has a really nice ring on that's like worth a lot of money. He brings her up to the stage. This part gets a little weird. So he takes the ring from her, and he makes sure it's in the handkerchief. He puts it in that little box back there, and then she gives her a pistol. I have no clue why. And then he pretends to like auction off the ring. But then he takes the ring and the handkerchief, puts it in the pistol, and then they shoot it at the tree, which he takes out. And then the song slows down. And then so now he's just explaining, he kind of went in and described like what it's made out of. It's made of like teak wood and like velvet. It's very nicely made. And then he'll explain in a little bit how it happens.
And you can see there's one just coming here. Orange blossom appears there. Here is another one. Up here is another one. This mechanical marvel would create orange blossom. And then, as the audience watched in those days of old, the leaves would start to move, and oranges would appear on the orange tree. One of the most beautiful pieces of magic ever made. Absolutely gorgeous.
And then, so it goes on, and he plucks some of the oranges from the tree, and he demonstrates, the little assistant comes out, and he demonstrates that they're actual real oranges. He slices one open, and then he gives it out to the audience. So it's pretty cool, I think. And then at the very end, so you can see there's one orange and it actually opens up, and then from behind, two butterflies hold up the handkerchief that he had put in to the box earlier, and it has a ring attached to it. And then she just verifies that it's the same ring that she was wearing earlier. Okay, and then so and paralleling with that, if you've ever seen the movie The Illusionist, which came out in 2006, it's like a mystery drama. I haven't seen it, but apparently it's really good. There's a scene where the magician performs on the stage a magic trick, and as you'll see, you know, with the whole thing in this class, like there's nothing new under the sun, it's really similar to the automata seen in the previous book. So, obviously there's some like digital effects, so it's not the same. Also, I sped it up. But, so it's literally the same exact trick, and at the end, showing she doesn't have a ring, and it appears right there. And so that was an adaptation to that trick into modern day. Next up, we have Georges Méliès, which we also learned about in this class. He was the director of the silent film we watched, A Trip to the Moon, and he was most notably known for the transition from bringing stage magic into film with his use of special effects that we learned, like the close-up and like the cut and splicing of the film and such. And then lastly, I put Harry Houdini. He's my personal favorite. He's also known as the king of cards, the king of handcuffs, and he's known for his escape acts. Some of them he's done escape from a straitjacket underwater. He was buried alive and escaped from that. Basically, he's he's done a lot of cool tricks. He also, one that's not an escape trick, but he made like a whole elephant disappear in front of like a crowd. That was crazy. He actually first became famous through vaudeville. He was like an actor, but he didn't make that much money through it, so he kind of went to the magic trade. And he was the president of the Society of American Magicians. And basically through that, he worked to make the magicians around the world become like more of an organized group. And he worked to get rid of people who exposed magicians and other undesirables in the magic community. And so obviously there's been other magicians since then. So here I have a poster for David Blaine, who is one of the famous magicians of our time, compared to a poster of Robert Houdin, who was, as you can see, it was hundreds of years apart, yet the posters still kind of resemble each other in that they rely on the same facts of like the scare factor, kind of, the mystery. They're still there around in the magic community.
Okay, so the act that we kind of wanted to focus on was Sawing Through a Woman, which you guys might have read about, or I think we're going to read about it later this week. And basically, this act has been done by many magicians, but the one that kind of started it was P.T. Selvett, and he created an illusion in 1921. And before this, like, women weren't really used as a magician's assistant. So the cliche you know today of like beautiful women being used to help magicians wasn't really a thing until this act. And it also was just kind of like shocking and sensationalized and kind of changed the course of magic history in that way. Also, its success depended really greatly on the political climate of the time. So during this time period, like a couple years before, women had just been emancipated, so they gained the right to vote. And this was not really an easy thing that happened. Like, women struggled greatly. It was kind of a violent time. And basically, he was able to draw upon that because women, by like sawing a woman in half, he was showing like the violence that they had been through during the emancipation process. And then by putting them back together, it was kind of like an empowering thing, because you know, through the act, it's like you saw a woman in half and then you put her back together and show that she's fine. So it was kind of like an empowering move for women, so he drew upon that. He also drew upon the fact that like during the 20th century, fashions had changed a lot for women. So they were no longer wearing the giant Victorian kind of clunky outfits. They were wearing more sleek, modern outfits, and so they were able to be used more in acts rather than men. So he also drew upon that. And then World War I had just ended as well. So this act would have maybe seen as more shocking and like kind of frowned upon, but because the war had just happened, it was kind of a more desensitized time, so he was able to also do a more shocking act and then also have it be accepted by people during this time period. So now we have kind of our rendition of this, or our revival of the Sawing a Woman in Half. So basically,
Sorry, it's all in white. They ran out of like the other filament.
So basically what we did is we went into our saw and then split it into 3 sections. So you can see that it's been split, and she's going to take out the little section to show that there's been
So it's split.
Yeah. And I'm just going to put them back in,
Okay.
and then we're going to put it back together. So basically it's just like our kind of rendition of it, and like we kind of wanted to, obviously we had to do it on a smaller scale because we don't have the necessary means to make a large scale version of that. But we also kind of were talking about how like today, magic tricks, I mean you have the acts in Vegas and that kind of thing, but magic is seen more as like a party trick and something with like, you know, your friends are like, oh, this is a cool thing that I did. So we kind of wanted to show it on a smaller scale to draw into that, and how it's more like a smaller scale thing today with card tricks and just like smaller acts and that kind of thing.
Great, thank you.